Hello, and welcome to the dark room, the place where the shadows come to life and the things that go bump in the night are all too real. Today I'll be your guide through the twisted and terrifying stories that we have in store for you. From spine-chilling urban legends to bone-chilling ghost stories, we'll explore the darkest corners of the human psyche and leave you trembling in fear. So, turn off the lights, grab a blanket, and get ready to enter the dark room. The Curse of the Abandoned Palace. Once upon a time, in a far-off kingdom, a new king was crowned after the sudden demise of the previous one. The new king was young, ambitious, and filled with ideas to transform his kingdom into a prosperous one. However, there was one thing that made him different from all his predecessors. He was fearless, or at least he believed so. On the first day of his coronation, the king announced his plans to visit the Accident Palace located in the middle of a dense forest. The palace was notorious for the number of accidents that happened in and around it. People had reported sightings of ghosts, paranormal activities, and unexplained phenomena. No one had dared to stay there overnight, except for a few brave souls who never returned. Despite the warnings and pleas of his ministers and advisors, the king remained resolute in his decision. He believed that the rumors about the palace were nothing but superstitions and myths, and he was determined to prove his point. He decided to spend his first night as the king at the Accident Palace. The journey to the palace was long and arduous. The forest was dense, and the path was treacherous. The king and his entourage had to cross many hurdles, including crossing a river, climbing a steep hill, and fighting off a few wild animals. Finally, after hours of walking, they arrived at the palace. The palace was grand and imposing, but it was also eerie and ominous. The doors creaked as they opened, and the wind whistled through the broken windows. The palace was dusty and unkempt, and it smelled of decay and rot. The king and his entourage explored the palace, and the king was satisfied with what he saw. He dismissed his entourage and decided to spend the night alone in the palace. The king made himself comfortable in one of the rooms and settled down for the night. However, he couldn't sleep. He heard strange noises, whispers, footsteps, and moans. He dismissed them as the wind and tried to sleep again, but he couldn't. The noises became louder, and he started to feel a chill in the air. He decided to investigate and got up from his bed. As he walked through the palace, he realized that something was not right. The palace was not empty. It was alive with shadows and figures. The figures were humanoid, but they were twisted and distorted. They were covered in blood, and their eyes glowed in the dark. The king was terrified, but he couldn't run. He was paralyzed with fear. The figures surrounded him, and he realized that he was in grave danger. He tried to scream, but his voice was hoarse. He tried to run, but his legs wouldn't move. The figures closed in on him, and he could feel their cold breath on his face. Suddenly, he heard a voice, a faint whisper in his ear. "Welcome to your new kingdom, my dear king. This is just the beginning." The king woke up screaming, covered in sweat. He realized that it was just a nightmare, but the fear lingered. He decided to leave the palace and never return. As he walked back through the forest, he heard a faint laughter. He turned around, but there was no one there. The next day, the king was a changed man. He was no longer fearless. He was haunted by the memories of the Accident Palace and the figures that surrounded him. He realized that there were some things in the world that were beyond his control. He never spoke of his experience to anyone, and he never visited the palace again. The Accident Palace remained a mystery, shrouded in darkness and fear. The king tried his best to forget about the incident at the accident palace, but it was always at the back of his mind. He started to see shadows and figures out of the corner of his eyes, even in the safety of his own palace. His ministers and advisors noticed the change in his behavior, but they didn't know what had caused it. They assumed it was the pressure of ruling a kingdom. Days turned into weeks, and weeks turned into months. The king was struggling to maintain his composure. He couldn't sleep properly, and he was losing weight. His ministers and advisors decided to take action. They brought in healers, priests, and even sorcerers to help the king, but nothing seemed to work. One day, a stranger arrived at the palace. He claimed to be a traveler from a distant land and asked to meet with the king. The king was reluctant to meet him, but his advisors convinced him to do so. The stranger was unlike anyone the king had ever met. He was tall and lean, with piercing eyes and a mysterious aura. The stranger introduced himself as a seer and claimed that he could help the king with his problem. He asked the king about his experiences at the accident palace, and the king hesitated at first, but then he opened up. He told the seer about the figures he saw and the voice he heard. The seer listened carefully and then nodded. "I know what's happening to you, my dear king. You have been cursed by the spirits of the accident palace. They have chosen you as their vessel, and they won't let go until they have achieved their objective." The king was shocked. He didn't believe in curses and spirits, but the seer's words rang true. He decided to trust the seer and asked him what he could do to break the curse. The seer told the king that he needed to return to the accident palace and confront the spirits. He needed to face his fears and overcome them. The king was hesitant, but the seer convinced him that it was the only way. The king gathered his bravest soldiers and returned to the accident palace. He was terrified, but he didn't show it. He entered the palace and called out to the spirits. At first, there was no response, but then the figures appeared. They surrounded him, but this time, the king was ready. He drew his sword and faced them. The spirits attacked him, but the king fought back with all his might. He was fueled by anger and fear, but he didn't back down. He fought until the spirits were vanquished. As they disappeared, the king heard a voice, the same voice he heard in his nightmare. "Well done, my dear king. You have passed the test. You have proven yourself to be brave and fearless. You have earned our respect." The king left the accident palace, a changed man once again. He was no longer haunted by his fears. He had faced them and conquered them. He returned to his palace, a hero in the eyes of his people. He ruled his kingdom with wisdom and compassion, and he never forgot the lessons he learned at the accident palace. The accident palace was a grand structure that had seen better days. It was located in the middle of a dense forest, surrounded by trees and overgrown vegetation. The palace had once been a magnificent building with sprawling gardens, but years of neglect had taken their toll. The palace's walls were made of stone and had intricate carvings that had been chipped away by time. The roof was made of clay tiles that were now covered in moss and leaves. The palace had several levels, each with its own set of rooms and corridors. The main entrance of the palace had a large wooden door with brass handles. The door had been left ajar, as if inviting visitors inside. The inside of the palace was dark and musty, with cobwebs covering the corners and ceilings. The air was thick with dust and the smell of decay. The furniture inside the palace had once been lavish, but now it was in a state of disrepair. The chairs and tables were covered in cobwebs and dust, and some of them had missing legs or arms. The curtains were torn and faded, and the paintings on the walls had been eaten away by insects. despite its dilapidated state, the accident palace still had an air of mystery and grandeur. The architecture and the carvings on the walls hinted at the palace's glorious past. The palace was said to have been cursed, but no one knew for sure what had happened there. The only thing that was certain was that anyone who spent the night there never came back the same. The ancient king assumed the palace are shrouded in mystery and legend, and many different stories have been told over the years. Some say that the king had lost his mind and went mad, while others claim that he was killed by a curse that had been placed upon him by an enemy. Still, others say that the spirits of the palace had driven him out. One of the most popular legends surrounding the palace involves the king's family. It is said that the king had a beautiful daughter whom he loved dearly. One day, a prince from a neighboring kingdom came to visit the palace, and the king saw an opportunity to unite the two kingdoms through marriage.